Well, it is the 30th of May, 1924, and I'm sitting here with United States Magistrate Judge William E. Cassady, and I'm going to be talking to him this morning about his life and times. How are you, Judge?
Doing well. Good to
Thank
see you, Patrick.
Thank you for spending time with us this morning. Before we get started, and as I told you, I've got to read a little release here. And of course, I'm Patrick Finnegan. I'm a lawyer here in Mobile, and we've known each other a very long time. And I'll mention that, as we get underway. But I'm conducting this interview on behalf of the Mobile Bar Association's Archives and History Committee. And so before we get started, I have to formally get your permission to conduct this interview and to have it recorded and transcribed so that it can be preserved, edited, and released in whole or in part by the Mobile Bar Association for viewing by its members and the public. Do you give your permission for this, Judge?
I do give my permission.
Thank you. All right. Well, as I said, this is a kind of a review of the life and times of Magistrate Judge William E. Cassady. So I thought we'd just start out by talking a little bit about your background. So when and where were you born, and just give us a little flavor of what it was like where you were and growing up.
Okay, I was born in 1950 in Lowndes County, just south of Montgomery, on the Butler County, Lowndes County line, a little small community, still small, on a family farm, and grew up there. And it was one of those, even when I came along in 1950, it was pretty much self-sufficient. We had our own cattle, pigs, chickens, cats, dogs, horses, and we farmed. We grew food for the animals, and then we slaughtered animals and prepared meat for the rest of the year.
Right.
And things like that. We didn't personally do it. We took them to a slaughterhouse, but that's kind of the way we managed back in those days. And that family farm had been in our family since the late 1800s, around 1898, somewhere in there. And until my dad's generation, which was World War II generation, all the family members had provided for the family off of that farm. And then when he got back from World War II, he started a business, or he entered the business of selling auto parts. He was a Napa auto parts salesman, and then he became a store owner. So when I grew up, I was his number one farm hand. I had one sister, and we worked on the farm, and that was pretty much my experience. Hunting, fishing, horseback riding. In a small community like that, my travel until I got my license was by bicycle or horse. And so that's kind of the way I grew up. Boy Scouts in that little community. Although I was a big Alabama fan, our scout leader was a big Auburn fan, so he took us to Auburn football games, and Auburn was close by, so it wasn't until I entered University of Alabama before I went to my first Alabama football game.
You played a little football yourself in school, did you?
We did. Like I told you, it was such a small school, 1A school. If you were male, you played. And so I played football, basketball, baseball, and ran track.
Wow. That kept you occupied, kept you out of trouble.
It did.
And so a couple things. Where was your father's store?
He had two. He had a retail store in Fort Deposit, which is in Lowndes County. And then he had one in Camden, which is Wilcox County. Okay. So he had two. They were about 50 miles apart.
And you helped him as you were growing up.
Right.
You would work with him both on the farm and in the store.
Right.
Okay. And then where did you go to school?
college.
No, top, like high school.
It was Lowndes County High School,
Okay, and what year did
which
you?
is no longer in existence.
Oh, really?
It ceased to exist in 1984. So, the last time we had a class reunion, we had to call everybody, not just a single class. You had to invite everybody to get a crowd.
How long ago was that you had the reunion?
About 8 years ago.
Okay.
We haven't had one since.
Did you have a decent showing at that time?
For that small school, it was decent, but they built a new, like a lot of the rural counties are doing. They built a big central high school in the middle of the county. And that's where all the kids go to high school now. And they turned my former high school that was in the community into a middle school.
Okay. And you attended middle school and high school there?
Mhm.
Okay, and then what year did you graduate?
Grammar school, middle school, high
Okay,
school,
all the way
in the
up.
same building. It was a horseshoe building, and one side was the grammar school, one side middle, and one side high school.
What year did you graduate from high school?
69,
Okay, and then you went on to the University of Alabama.
right?
And had anybody in your prior generations in your family been to college?
My aunt, my dad's sister,
Okay,
went to Troy and graduated and went into the teaching profession.
okay.
She taught grammar school, but she was the first member of our family to go to college.
And at that time, when you were graduating high school, what percentage of your high school graduating class would have been going on to college in some college?
It was very high, because we had a principal that really pushed going on to get a higher education. And so it was above 80%,
Oh, wow.
which was, for that rural community, it was extremely high.
It does seem very high. And then you landed in Tuscaloosa, and what was that like?
It was a different world. It was like I've never seen before. And back in those days, you couldn't have a car on campus.
Is that
Your
right?
freshman year. So I'll never forget, I was in a dorm, my dad and mom drove me up there. And as my dad was prone to do, drove the wrong way on a one-way entrance to the dorm, parked the car, put my bags on the sidewalk, didn't even take them into the dorm and said, "See you later."
Well, it was a crisp, dividing point in your life.
And I was quite homesick, and it was so funny. You couldn't have a car on campus. Well, the dorm was on the city street, and half of the street was on the university, and the other half was the city of Tuscaloosa. So I talked my dad into letting me drive my car up and park it on the Tuscaloosa side of the street. And so there was my car out in front of the dorm. I couldn't use it on the university, but if I was ready to go home, I didn't have to catch a ride after that.
Was that a common thing for students to do?
I don't know. It was more common for us all to find an upperclassman that was headed our way. Many times I would ride with somebody to Montgomery, and then my folks would come to Montgomery and pick me up, bring me home. But after I learned that I could park on the other side of the street, that solved that problem.
So when you went to Tuscaloosa, I mean, at that time, even though geographically it's not a huge distance from where you grew up, you just didn't have the kind of communication that students have today. In other words, you kind of went and you were at school. I mean, you could have been much further away geographically for the amount of communication you had at home. Is that right?
Right. And, back then, my dad frowned on long distance phone calls. They actually cost money. Which they do now, but people don't kind of realize it. It's such a common thing now.
Sure.
But back then, and our farmhouse was on a party line, which was a whole nother story. I used to pick the phone up, and Miss Golson down the road would be talking to somebody. And she would know that I had picked up and I was listening to their conversation. She'd say, "Billy, get off that phone."
That is so funny. And from today's perspective, it looks almost like Mayberry, that kind of a close-knit community where.
I haven't thought of that in years, but it was kind of, you had to accommodate the needs of other people in the community. And that was one of the things you had to learn to use the phone at particular times, or to certainly check and see and let them know if you're hanging up. Because that didn't last that long. When I got into high school, I think they had finally worked it out to where you had single line.
Privacy. So at Tuscaloosa, what did you focus on academically?
Well, my mother was a registered nurse and had been part of she was a county health nurse, and then she became a registered nurse at Stabler's Hospital in Butler County. And then she taught nursing. She taught practical nursing at one of the community colleges in Evergreen. And so she and the doctors that she worked with had this idea that I should try to get a medical degree, come back and work with them at the hospital. And so I went to Alabama with the intention of going into pre-med, and did. And I did not like the coursework. I got to thinking about what doctors actually do, what kind of personality and what kind of frame of mind it takes to be able to treat people and not worry about mistakes that you might have made, things like that. And after talking with the counselors at school, I decided to change my direction my freshman year. Okay. And so when I started my sophomore year, I was in political science and history.
And did you have a career in mind when you made that change?
I was looking at, because I had made that change and went through the counseling, and started making a serious look at, when I got out of high school, I thought, I probably could do most anything. Like a lot of high school seniors feel, I'm sure. But when I got to Alabama, I realized that's not necessarily true. And so I started looking at what skills I had, what background I had, what I could potentially strive for. And my dad was interested in me helping him run his businesses. And so I looked into that. But I convinced myself that maybe the legal career would be something that I would be most interested in, most qualified for. And so that's where I started focusing.
Did you have any people you knew growing up that were lawyers?
Yes, I did, and they were pretty helpful. They would talk to me. One was a judge in Greenville that was crazy about my mom because she had treated him for a serious problem that he had at the hospital, and he was really nice to me because of what she had done for him.
And did the idea of being a lawyer I assume it hadn't occurred to you until this period in college in your freshman year, when you start to really focus in on
right. And my dad got involved in a lawsuit with Alabama Power Company over transmission lines across the property. And I was able to monitor that case and watched, you may know the Poole family from Butler County, but they were great lawyers. That kind of got close, I just became interested in that as a teenager. But I was convinced by these others that were also prodding me into the medical field that maybe that was where my talents would lie, but that changed, like I said, when I was in college.
So when you kind of decided going into your sophomore year that you were going to focus on studies that would lead to a career in the law, Did you have a vision of what that legal career would look like?
Small town practice.
Okay.
Matter of fact, I had already decided that Camden would be where I would. Camden was the county seat of Wilcox County, and that's where my dad's business was. My working with him in the summers, had given me a lot of relationships with customers. And I didn't know the lawyers that well, they were older. But that's where I decided that I would set up shop when I got out of law school.
So you worked away at Tuscaloosa, and then what year did you graduate?
73.
Okay. And what did you do then?
I went back home, went to work with my dad, and I had some injuries from football.
Okay.
And I had to have those repaired. And during that time, I was trying to make that determination whether or not to go to law school or to stay in the family business. And as I recovered from surgery and worked with him, it became painfully apparent to me that I was not a businessman. And the worst thing I could do is try to run those businesses. So it's kind of like one of the judges used to tell me that they got the calling to go to law school while he was in waist deep water digging a ditch. And so I guess I got my calling when I was giving loggers the wrong alternator for a Caterpillar or something like that.
Yeah.
So I immediately decided that maybe law school was in my future. And my sister at the time was dating a lawyer from Washington. And
From Washington State?
DC.
Washington DC. Yeah.
And he was instructive as to what to do. And so, but when I left.
So your sister's older than you?
No, she's younger.
Okay.
But she was she's younger, but she and I graduated college the same year because she went to Judson College, which was an all-girls school at the time. And she went on a 3-year program. And so she and I graduated the same year. She went into physical therapy and went to University of Alabama at Birmingham to get her PT license. And then she immediately left and went to Las Vegas, Nevada to start her physical therapy practice.
What do your folks think about that?
It was tough decision, but my mother's sister lived there.
Okay.
And her family, so she had her aunt and uncle and 3 cousins in Las Vegas. So that's where
So that sounds like an interesting tangent we could go down.
Yeah, that is.
Did she just kind of with your sister? Did she stay in Las Vegas after that? Or
Well, when she got married, she married a police officer, and they decided they wanted to raise their children in a more rural setting.
Sure.
So they moved to northern Nevada, a little place called Elko.
Okay.
And that's where they raised their kids.
Okay. Interesting.
My nieces and nephews live in Laramie, Wyoming, Elko, Nevada, and Walla Walla, Washington. Now, if you had told me that when I was growing up, I would have said, no, that'll never happen.
It sounds like you're not city folk in your line. I mean, by and large.
It looks like it.
Big city folk anyway. So you through a process of kind of looking at things very, objectively decided that career in the law was for you, and you talked to various people and then you get out and you have this year with your dad working and you decide, all right, I gotta go to law school. I'm sure about that. So what happened then?
Well, I had to make a decision about how I was gonna pay for it. And decided that I would, I was able to get into Jones Law School at the time, which was holding their classes at Huntington College, and they were owned by the University of Alabama Law School. So I applied, got into school, and then I worked at various jobs during the day, and I would go 3 nights a week.
Okay.
And so that helped pay for it, and then I had to borrow some money to
Sure.
pay for it, but in working, my jobs included in the legal department of the Alabama Insurance Department, which was in Montgomery, so that was. And I was able to work for a law firm for a while too, as a matter of fact. And then I also worked for a bank for a while
Okay.
while I was
So
going to law school.
a variety of experience.
It was
So then when did you go to law? When did you start law school?
74.
Okay. And when did you graduate?
77, December of 77.
Okay. And that's the year you got married too, right?
No, I got married in April of 78.
Okay.
We were dating at the time, but didn't get married until April. I wanted to wait until after I graduated from law school.
Very, very sensible of you. And your wife is from Mobile, is that correct?
She was working with Larry Harless at Gilbert Imported Hardwoods and had a great job. She was an office manager and had been working with them for some time.
And how did you all meet?
Her mother's brother lived in our area. And so when her mother was visiting her brother, and he had a diner, one of the only diners in the area, and it was a social club. It sure was. And she met me and got to telling me about her daughters. She had 2 daughters. Well, she had 3, but one was already married, and the other 2 weren't. And then things got established that my old quarterback that I played with had a date with one of her sister, and he wanted me to go with Gina. And so we had a blind date based on that relationship from her mother.
So you were pre-approved by the mother.
Pre-approved by the mother, and that's the way it started. And we dated, and she would come to Lowndes County, I would come to Mobile, and we dated for several months before we decided to get married.
And then you graduated law school in 77, and then you took the bar in 78. Was that it?
When we got married, we moved to Mobile. I moved to Mobile.
Okay.
And we got an apartment off of Airport Boulevard, and Gina had the income. I was studying for the bar, but I was doing odd jobs. You know, I just felt like, you know, it was better if I was doing something to try to earn a little money, kind of like it was when I was in law school. And Mr. Harless gave me some, you know, common labor work out at his company. And it just so happened that his law firm was Hand Erendahl, and Alex Langford was one of the lawyers that represented him. And I met Alex Langford and got to talking to him about my future and all of that stuff. And Alex said, well, let me introduce you to Bard Hand. And he brought me to the courthouse and introduced me to Judge Hand, who was the chief judge at the time. And for some reason we clicked and became good friends. And he invited me to intern while I was waiting for the bar results. Well, actually, I can't remember if I'd already taken the bar. I think I was waiting, and I told him that would be great. And so I got to monitor some very interesting trials. One that comes to mind is the Cooper trial, where the mayor Pritchard was on trial. The government had charged him with some mismanagement of money or some type of fraud, I think. I can't remember exactly what the charges were, but the lawyers in that case were extremely good. And I monitored that whole case, and it was a big case at the time. And then as soon as I found out that I had passed the bar and had been instated, the very first case I had was appointed cases from Judge Hand and Judge Pittman.
Okay.
So I started my career in federal court. And Judge Hand's case was a perjury case. And Judge Pittman's case was a 2255 habeas corpus case involving the same person. And what was so interesting about it is this guy had pled guilty in the Northern Division to robbing a bank and received, Judge Pittman gave him a 20-year sentence. And he had somehow gotten the information that convinced the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI that he had been involved in the robbery. But he hadn't. And so he served a couple of years. And then he filed his 2255 saying that he had lied, and when he entered his guilty plea, he was not guilty of the robbery. And so the government turned around and charged him with perjury. And Judge Hand appointed me to the perjury charge, and Judge Pittman appointed me to the 2255, which the government came in and confessed. So we had the 20-year sentence removed. And then I went before Judge Hand and made the most eloquent argument a 3-month member of the bar could make, that he had served 24 months of a maximum of 5 years, and that was, he ought to sentence him to time served, and Judge Hand disagreed with me and gave him 18 more months.
Oh, my. Yeah, he was no softy, Judge. And I should add that, for posterity that we're talking about, Judge Hand and Judge Virgil Pittman of the Southern District of Alabama here,
Right.
where you, of course, ended up spending most of your career as magistrate judge. So those are interesting cases to get started with. And where did you go from there?
Well, I decided to go back to Camden to start. I went to apply with the other lawyers to become an associate, to learn.
Okay.
And to work in their offices. So I went up and did the rounds, and I think there were maybe 3 lawyers in Camden at the time. And none of them, well, 4, there were actually 4. None of them were interested in bringing on an associate. And they actually, I think they kind of discouraged me from opening an office in Camden.
Competition.
And I decided, well, I'll just have to do it myself. And so I went and got a sign prepared and found a little office to rent and just hung out a shingle and started my very first time at the circuit court. And the 4th Judicial Circuit, which includes Wilcox County, is the largest area circuit in the state. Population is not so much, but it's 5 counties. And the circuit judges really ride the circuit.
Mm-hmm.
They come out of Selma and they go to the outlying counties in the 4th Judicial Circuit. And so I went to the circuit judge that was in Camden at the time holding criminal court, and I got my name placed on the list for appointments. And I think Judge Norton appointed me to 5 criminal cases the first day I walked in there. One I'll never forget was my only moonshine, illegal alcohol case. He was making moonshine in a corn crib in Wilcox County. And he assigned me to a murder case where the father had killed his son and claimed that God had pulled the trigger, and he wasn't responsible for it. So I started with those cases. I also put my name on the list at the probate judge's office for assignment to sanity hearings, appointed counsel for sanity hearings. And so from the very first appearance in that small community, after I'd gotten my desk set up and my copy of the code, I started to work.
And who did you have any mentors or people that you could talk to, more seasoned lawyers that could help you with that? Because it sounds, to my ears, like that would just be overwhelming. Doing so many different kinds of law, taking on a murder case. I mean, that's.
I think I told you I bought a book, How to Find Your Way to the Courthouse Without Missing a Meal. And, after reading the book, I would talk with the other lawyers in town, and they were very helpful.
Mhm.
And one of the other tips that I got was to make a friend in the clerk's office. And, so I went and met the clerk and his deputy. And they were extremely friendly people, and they knew my dad. And so, you know how small communities are. I established a relationship with them. And so as things progressed, when somebody was looking with a non-conflicted lawyer in a particular case, I might have been it, since there were only 3 or 4 in town. So I got cases by referral that way. There were also walk-ins and things like that, but it just seemed that once word got around that I was practicing lawyer, and my dad would also refer people, you know, his customers that were having problems with something. And I took almost, you know, just a general civil practice, and I had my criminal practice going. And it wasn't very long after that Roy Johnson, you won't know these names, but Roy Johnson ran against Hawkeye Mara out of Selma. And Hawkeye Mara had been the district attorney in the 4th Judicial Circuit for years and years. And Roy beat him, and so he was cleaning house. And back in those days, the district attorney could assign assistant district attorneys to each of those outlying counties. And it was an old county solicitor type job where you would act on behalf of the prosecutor in civil in civil and criminal matters in the county. Before the district judge, he was always in the county. The circuit judges would come twice a year, but the district judge was always there. And so he appointed me as an assistant to Wilcox County. So that cut off the criminal defense work, but it also gave me a regular salary as an assistant district attorney. And I handled the misdemeanors, child paternity cases, and grand jury sessions.
What years were those that you were in that?
I'm gonna guess, I started in 78. I'm gonna guess around 81, maybe, I became the assistant district attorney. I also became the city attorney for the city of Camden about that same time. And I would prosecute city cases, and I would also handle civil matters for the city.
And how about the bookkeeping and all the other, you know, business part of your practice? Did you handle that yourself?
My wife helped, but I also hired a secretary fairly early on. Gina helped me get started. After she kept working for 6 months. And so I would come home to Mobile on Sunday night, on Friday nights and Wednesday nights. And then I'd go back Thursday morning and Monday morning. And I would drive back and forth for those 6 months. And then after my practice was sufficient to what I thought would support us, she quit her job and moved up to Camden. So that was about 6 months that we did that.
And how long did you stay in the position as the assistant DA?
Until I became a U.S. Magistrate Judge.
And what year was that?
85.
So
March of 85. I probably resigned in 84.
Okay.
I knew several months ahead of my swearing in March of 85 that I had been selected. And so I started shutting down my practice. And part of that was to resign from the city and to resign from the district attorney's office. The biggest party anybody ever threw for me was when I was leaving Camden. And there were smiles all around.
Do they have a nickname for you up there?
I don't, if they did, I don't know.
A tough prosecutor. So, you start as a United States magistrate judge in the Southern District of Alabama in 1985.
Right.
So, come up on 40 years.
All right.
How did that happen? How did you end up in that position?
Well, when Judge Bagwell, David Bagwell, announced that he was going back into private practice, I knew from my experience as an intern and from my experience in practicing in the Selma courthouse, I had some federal cases before Judge Cox and Judge Hand and the bankruptcy court, that my affinity for the federal practice was pretty strong. And the idea of becoming a part of the district bench at that time, which was evolving. Alan Cameron, I think, was the first magistrate judge, and he was on the bench when I was the intern. And then when I left and went into private practice, David Bagwell and Pat Sims became magistrate judges. And we had a part-timer in Selma, but the AO had abolished that position. And so you just had the two in Mobile. And so Gina and I talked about it, and it was so funny. When I took her from Mobile, she cried all the way to Camden. And then we had our daughter in Camden, and we'd gotten so involved into the community and everything. When I told her we were coming back to Mobile, it was a tearful experience all the way back. But I just felt like that was something that I would enjoy. That type of work. I'd had an experience in private practice. I'd had the opportunity to view the court, watch the workings of the court, had a chance to experience the federal rules and the manner in which the cases were presented in federal court. And it was just, I felt like a great opportunity. And I knew the judges. So, I felt like they knew me. So I felt like maybe I had an extra point that would be considered because they weren't, if they picked me, they wouldn't be picking someone that they didn't know.
You're a known quantity, so to speak.
I didn't know Judge Cox that well, or Judge Pittman, but I knew Judge Thomas and Judge Hand pretty well.
So you were successful, and you started in 1985. Can you tell us a little bit about what the work of a magistrate judge here in the Southern District of Alabama looked like at that time?
Well, first of all, you're dominated by the criminal work. Magistrate judges are on call, especially back then, 24 hours a day for the issue of warrants, search warrants, arrest warrants. And back then, it was still, we didn't have cell phones or email or anything like that. So it was generated on paper. And so we had to have mechanisms like if you took arrest warrant applications at home or search warrant applications at home off hours, we had manuals that we kept at home, and we had recorders that we kept at home so that we could record the session. And so we did a lot of criminal work. This district has always had a very high criminal docket. That was the baseline. You had to make sure that your criminal work was moved along on pace with the Speedy Trial Act. Then on top of that, the district judges were referring to us for prisoner cases, which were substantial. All the pro se prisoner cases, all the habeas corpus cases, both federal and state. and summary judgment motions, motions to dismiss on report recommendation, because Judge Hand and Judge Cox were the only active district judges at the time, and they were just overwhelmed with the number of cases and trials that they.
There were just two district court judges at the time, and did you have any senior judges?
We did, Judge Pittman and Judge Thomas, but they were both taking reduced loads.
Okay.
In '85. And we had, and it was much harder to get the work done, if you can imagine, because you had paper files. And if you had a magistrate judge and a district judge assigned to a paper file, it may be on a district judge's law clerk's desk, it may be on a magistrate judge's law clerk's desk. Criminal cases probation may have the file. We had to share libraries, law libraries, because that's something, the only research you could do is the old book research. And I shared the library with Judge Thomas and Judge Pittman. And you go in and their law clerks would have the same books that I needed, maybe something like that. So sometimes you just had to wait to get the material you needed to enter a report recommendation.
And what staff did you have to help?
I had an administrative assistant, Molly Compton, who was great. I mean, that's one thing I want to emphasize in this interview, that one of the greatest experiences of my life has been the wonderful people that I've been able to work with. And Molly was the first person I came in, and Molly was terrified that I was going to clean house and kick her out on the street. And that was one of the best decisions I ever made. Although I didn't know Molly, had never met her, we clicked immediately, and she was just a wonderful administrative assistant. And I had one law clerk, and the law clerk, I had a 2-year term at the time. And that evolved once we started getting computers and being able to generate our own documents and electronic filing. The administrative assistant, as far as I was concerned, for the work that magistrate judges were doing, was no longer as needed as a second law clerk. And the AO recognized that as well, and they came up with the idea that magistrate judges could have two, one permanent and one rotating. And so at that point in time, I shifted to keeping Laura Young-Peter as my permanent clerk, and then I would hire one to rotate every 2 years.
And Laura Young-Peter stayed with you for many years.
30 years.
Wow. Laura, of course, I first met you, Judge, in 1995 when I arrived there as a law clerk for District Court Judge Richard Ballmer. And Laura was working for you at the time, and I can certainly attest to how competent Laura was. She assisted me and others in the courthouse with matters. And I'll say this: I arrived in '95 and did a 1-year term. But so you were 10 years into the job at that time, and it was a busy courthouse back then, and the magistrate judges were very helpful to the district court judges. And I recall, in particular, Judge Ballmer had a very big criminal case. When it went to trial, it tried for 2 months, just about. But there were a lot of motions, and there was a very substantial motion to suppress made by the defendants. And I was very relieved when he told me he was going to refer that to Judge Cassady. I dodged a bullet on that one, but so y'all were doing a lot of heavy lifting back in that time.
We were, and it's magistrate judges were an unknown quantity back in those days. Almost everyone, when I would tell them what I did for a living, would ask me, what is a magistrate judge? What do they do? You can even get on the internet now, and when you see these articles about magistrate judges, you'll have questions about, well, are they federal judges? Are they appointed for life? it was just a lot of questions. Somebody asked me, what question do you get most often? And the answer is, what is a magistrate judge? And what was so funny, when I came on board, judge was not part of our title. We were called magistrate. And a lot of the work that I helped with nationally and locally, because in Mobile, even though that was the term, I was called judge. You know, when lawyers spoke to me, they would use the term judge. Well, it was confusing, and it was confusing all across the nation to people that came into the court. And people were wondering, is the magistrate court, they were calling it the magistrate court, is it distinguishable from the district court? And so there was a lot of effort put into educating congressmen, their staff, educating the public, educating lawyers, that we were part of the district bench. And we had certain authority granted by statute, but it was a very broad grant of things that we could do. And then you can't identify everything that a judge, and then it even became more complicated, because if somebody wanted to appeal something that I did back in those days, you had to decide whether the district judge had to decide whether to treat that as a de novo appeal, where they have to go from scratch, they have to consider the information from scratch, or all of the information, or whether it was an appeal for clear error. And that is a burden much higher, that the objector had to show that the magistrate judge had clearly erred in whatever decision was made. And that goes on today. I just read some opinions today about that distinction between, is this something that you should have made or presented on a report and recommendation that has a de novo appeal right to it? Or is it a non-dispositive issue that you can rule on that carries a clear error appellate right? And so we worked really hard, and by 1991, and if you look at the congressional history of the magistrate judges, the first act was in 1968, where we went from commissioners to magistrates.
Mm-hmm.
And then they started tinkering more with that. You know, what can they do? What authority do they have? And you started seeing more definitive congressional statutes in the late 70s about what they could do or what we could do. And by 1991, Congress was convinced that they needed to change the name to give more stature, more definition to what we actually did in the district court. And so that's when they came up with the term magistrate judge. Mm-hmm. And that's when we became magistrate judges. And
what year was that, Judge?
1991.
Okay.
And there were also other issues that were coming up constantly about, do we have contempt powers where we have cases on consent? You know, if we have contemptuous conduct in our presence in a trial, for instance, do you have to just report that to a district judge and wait for the district judge to decide if that should be punished or not? Or do we have the authority to immediately impose some type of punishment or take some corrective action? So then Congress gives us contempt powers in those instances where we are the trial judge. And so it's just an evolution of trying to enhance the position to give it the flexibility that Congress intended initially. And when I say flexibility, the idea is that every district has a different mix of cases. And so in utilizing magistrate judges, Congress wanted the district judges to have the ability to use them where needed, where they could best accommodate, just like you're talking about in that, which was unusual. motions to suppress, district judges typically will handle them themselves. But where you've got a difficult issue and you're trying to resolve other issues in a case like that and keep it on track, it makes sense maybe to send it out to a magistrate judge on an ad hoc basis for report and recommendation. And then you've at least refined the facts and the issues down to something the district judge can make a decision.
And certainly in that instance that I talked about, it was a huge issue, because, you know, in the run into that trial, that was a very active file. There were multiple defendants, corporate and individual, and there was just, I was the law clerk on it, and you know, I was getting swamped. And so that was a discrete task that could be assigned to somebody if there was someone available. And the lawyers, I mean, it was a who's who of the leading criminal defense practitioners in Mobile that represented the defendants in that case. And that was where I first met, you know, the late great Fred Helmsling, who was the name partner with the firm that I've been with now for many years. You know, they kept it very active, and they actually, in this instance for this motion to suppress, as I recall, they brought in a lawyer from Texas who had a similar issue come up in a case that he'd had in Texas and had been very successful with, and they brought him in. So this was a sharpshooter from Texas, and you know, I was a law clerk, and you know, I mean, I can't even remember if I'd done a motion to suppress at that time. So it was certainly, I know Judge Vaughn was very, very pleased with that. He was, and it was all taken care of. You know, and so in other words, that was always my impression as a law clerk when I was over there in the federal court, was that the magistrate judges in that courthouse were there they were available if and when needed, if they were permitted to take something on. Their orientation was, well, how can we help the district court?
Right. That was by design with us. We wanted to do that, and we were trying to figure out in the early days, just Milligan and I, when it was just the two of us, how we could do that on a consistent basis and to push the envelope on utilization with the approval of the district judges. And it just so happens that our district judges all along my career here in Mobile have all taken that position. We want to push the envelope on utilization so that we can effectively move the cases in our court. One of the best examples, early on, we did very little management, what I will call management criminal cases. We handled all the preliminary criminal hearings, but when it got to pretrial conferences, status conferences like they were called in the old days, the district judges would do them themselves. Judge Hand was notorious for lining up 18 defendants shackled together across the courtroom, and he'd go one by one. What's the status of your case? Are you going to plead? Are you going to trial? What's going to happen? And if there were any motions, he'd rule on the motions. He'd have his clerks there to do that. But when Judge Butler became, primarily because Judge Howard was ill, the only active district judge, he had all those criminal cases, and then he had a civil docket to manage. And I heard him talk about it in his interview, and that was a tough period of time. Well, the logical avenue to relieve some of that pressure was magistrate judges. And so we could develop this plan about managing criminal cases. In other words, we would handle all the pretrial proceedings that were non-dispositive or didn't have an impact on the trial, like a motion to suppress, up until the point where the defendant decided whether he wanted a trial or he's going to plead. And if he decided to plead, we got the judges to give us their schedule for setting pleas. And we would set them on a plea docket before a particular district judge. If they wanted to go to trial, we would send that to the district judge that was supervising the setting of those trials. And we're still doing that today. And that started back, I believe, in Judge Butler. And that's also when, and Judge Balmer was a big proponent of this, where a Supreme Court came out, I think in the early 90s, that indicated that magistrate judges could strike even felony criminal cases with consent. We didn't know how the bar was going to react to that, but we just thought we'd try it. And so we proposed that to the bar. And we were getting all these consents to strike juries. So it was not uncommon until COVID hit, that the magistrate judges would strike most of the criminal juries and some of the civil juries for the district judges. And then we would strike them in 1 or 2 day period and set them to come back for when the trial was scheduled. Well, after COVID, that became not as efficient. And the way they were having to work the COVID jury trials, the district judges became more involved in striking the jury and going straight to trial on that particular case. And they started having jury selections maybe once a week instead of once a month, like we did several years ago. But that's just an example of the flexibility with the magistrate judge system.
And, it's clear from what you've just told us about how the role of the magistrate judge evolved in, under the law and also within the Southern District. It's clear that you just didn't go in and do the judge part of the job. You were thinking about the use of magistrates, how they could fit into the bigger picture and so forth. And you got involved in magistrate judge associations and committees and so forth, and were very active in those. So can you tell us a bit about that?
I wanted to be a part of this evolution as I saw it coming. The first thing that I was involved with was the pay issue, on how much magistrate judges were paid in relationship to other comparators and things like that. And by 1988, the Magistrate Judges Association, along with the bankruptcy judges and the district judges and the administrative office of the court, convinced Congress that a pay increase was appropriate. And so 1988 is a benchmark year for when that was enhanced.
Mm-hmm.
When that was enhanced, your applications for magistrate judges became probably the resumes I was looking at made mine look fairly puny. And so I just saw it across the board.
Mm-hmm.
You got these great applicants for these positions. And that happened after the name change too. And it became clearer that magistrate judges were part of the district bench.
Mm-hmm.
And then it became almost an automatic ascension into the district judgeship. We've had 2 here in our district,
Sure.
but many districts have magistrate judges that are being appointed on a regular basis to the district bench.
Sure.
After they served as magistrate judges. So all of those things we worked on in the Magistrate Judges Committee. We worked with Congress, we worked with the AO, and through that relationship, I became acquainted with a lot of people in the administrative office in Washington. And it helped us, in my opinion, bring on new people that we needed to manage. Bert and I were the only 2. Then Bill Steele was appointed as a temporary magistrate judge and then became a full-time magistrate judge.
And
then
Bert, of course, is Judge Millen.
Judge Millen, Bert Millen Jr., and Bill Steele, who eventually became district judge and our chief judge, and now is a senior district judge. And we were authorized a fourth magistrate judge position, and that was filled by Judge DuBose, who then became Christy DuBose, who became a magistrate judge, and then became a district judge and a chief district judge. So that's happened all across the country, and I keep hearing that as early as a couple of weeks ago when I was at the judicial conference. I was talking to some lawyers about magistrate judges that are new to me in the Middle District of Alabama and the Northern District of Alabama and in Florida as well. And they were telling me that it was all pleasant experiences with the quality of work that the magistrate judges are doing. And it was kind of an encouragement to know where we started in 1968 and where we've evolved to now in 2024, and how many more there are. And now you're even got, I can't remember the name of the Supreme Court opinion, but Justice Roberts wrote how crucial the work of the magistrate judges are or is to the judicial service that we provide, and that is often quoted nowadays. And statistically, you can see more consents where people are completely secure in having their case resolved before a magistrate judge. Another way that we've been utilized that changed dramatically from when I first came on is with the increased number of mediation conferences and settlement conferences. And so mid-90s to late 90s, we saw a lot more cases being resolved through mediation. And so the AO started having conferences for magistrate judges, and they were training opportunities for us to learn how to mediate cases. And so part of our responsibility became, and it's now a major part of what we do, is to inquire about settlement opportunities in every civil case, and giving the lawyers the option of when they and their clients feel comfortable with coming to us at no cost, they can come to us for a settlement conference, and it will be kept confidential from the trial judge. And when I'm the trial judge, or one of my colleagues is the trial judge by consent, the other judges have agreed to act as a settlement judge. And so I just got one from Kit Nelson, Judge Nelson, yesterday, where they want a settlement conference, but she's trying the case, so she sent it to me to hold the settlement conference. So that's one of the major changes, is the fact that we're doing settlement conferences on a regular basis, and we talk about that in every case as part of the case management in civil cases.
So again, everything you're saying is, reflective of how practical, the approach, particularly in the Southern District, has been to the use of magistrate judges. In other words, if there's a task that can be done by a magistrate judge, and there's no prohibition against it, that the magistrate judges have kind of figured out a way to make themselves useful and to lift the burden off the district court judges. And you, like I said, you have had leadership responsibilities and roles in the Magistrate Judge Association, and also, I believe, for the Magistrate Judge Committee of the Judicial Conference. Is that correct?
Right. And I was president of the Federal Magistrate Judges Association in 2007.
Okay.
I was inducted in New York City at the Roosevelt Hotel, which is, for a boy from my background, you can imagine being put in a suite in the Roosevelt to take on the responsibilities of that organization. And during my tenure, we worked on these matters that I'm talking about, pay issues, any issues coming up before the AO that involve magistrate judges, the constant attempt to expand the breadth of the flexibility of utilization to encourage other districts that were more hesitant to use their magistrate judges fully. They had them in roles that were less than what they could actually be used for. And at the end of that, at 1 year term, we talked about this. I was offered a trip to China in a prisoner exchange. And Gina and I jumped on that, and the State Department, this is in cooperation with the State Department and the Justice Department. And so if you have a treaty with a foreign country like China for prisoner exchanges, if an American citizen or national is in prison there and they want to come home, they want to come to the United States
To serve their
out
state.
their time,
Yeah.
they can make that application. And if the application is approved by the two countries that are involved in the treaty, then you have this consent hearing where a magistrate judge by statute is authorized to hold a hearing to determine whether or not they understand what it means if they ask for and are transferred back to the United States. In other words, they don't want any misconception about not having to serve their sentence, or that they're going to be early released, or that it's going to be a better situation than maybe what they're in. And so they appoint a magistrate judge, an assistant United States attorney, and a public defender. And I went to China to hold a hearing at Stanley Prison in Hong Kong. And of course, I'd never been to Hong Kong, but it just so happened my first cousin was living there at the time, and I got to visit with her and her family, and just had a wonderful time.
So just to be, clear about what was going on, you told me previously, Judge, that you were involved in two separate cases when you were in Hong Kong, and so both of the defendants in those cases had already been, convicted under the law in Hong Kong and were serving prison terms in Hong Kong, but they were American citizens or nationals. So under this arrangement, this treaty, they had the right to apply to finish out their sentence in the United States. So the process was that they would select a magistrate judge, a federal defender, and a prosecutor, an assistant United States attorney to travel to where the defendant was, the inmate was, and then to hold a hearing. And the assistant U.S. attorney and the federal defender who accompanied you were not from.
No, it's my recollection, the defender was from Boston and the prosecutor was from Philadelphia. And in one of the cases, the defendant could not speak English, so we had to have an interpreter during that hearing. One of the defendants was fluent in English, and the other was of Chinese descent and could not speak English, or that was represented to me.
And what were they convicted of, these two individuals?
One was weapons charges and explosive charges. And he was going to have to serve about 20 years when he got to the United States in a maximum security prison. The other one was charged with a crime similar to our embezzlement. And he had stolen a few $1 million from somebody. And what was interesting about his case is that they don't get pre-trial detention credit in Hong Kong, but they get it when they get back to the States. So he was banking on the fact that when he got back to the States, he had pretty much served his time. But if he stayed in Hong Kong, he's gonna have to serve X number of months. Because he had been in pretrial detention for some time. It was a massive paper case, if I'm not mistaken, and so it took him a while to get to trial.
Mhm. And, you mentioned you had a cousin there, and you told me previously that it was because her husband was working for a company that had
He
transferred
was,
there.
he was with Lexmark, who had a plant in China, not in Hong Kong,
Okay.
but he lived in Hong Kong and went to the plant in China. And, we went to Beijing as well while we were over there, just had a wonderful.
So you made a little trip out of it, which is great. Well, that was a nice perk
It was.
to enjoy. So Judge, it's 2024, and you're very active as a magistrate judge, but you are also retired. Can you explain how that comes about?
One of the expansions, if you will, of the authority of magistrate judges and the ability to serve was when Congress passed a retirement package, and I think this was back in 1988 as well, that gave courts the ability to recall retired magistrate judges. And that has to go through the local judges, the circuit, the 11th Circuit, and the Judicial Conference of the United States. And they look at the work you performed and the cost that it would incur and the workload in the district. And those are the basic considerations. Well, Judge Milling and I both are on recall status and have been on recall status for 5 or 6 years, since 2017. I think Bert retired earlier because I waited until I fulfilled 4 full terms, 4 8-year terms. And Bert might have decided to retire when he turned 65. But,
so you formally retired in 2017, and you have been serving since then as a callback, and you have to get that done every year.
yes,
On a
it has to
yearly
be
basis.
approved every year. And the chief judge of the district makes that application. So if your chief judge or the judges of your court don't want you to come back, they just don't make the application. But it is a yearly application that has to go through those various committees.
So Judge, you have stayed on, or is it now 7 years past your retirement? I guess you like the job.
I do. It was very helpful during COVID years, especially, to be able to come down to the courthouse. And I technically don't have any staff. So I'm in chambers pretty much by myself. And so I could come in during COVID. My only communications was by telephone with the clerk staff or whoever's there. And in the new courthouse, we have a judge's elevator, and usually I'd come in at a time when the other judges were pretty much already there. And so I'd get on the elevator, ride up by myself, go into my chambers, and I might not see anybody all day. And so it was a real relief to be able to get out of the house and be able to come down and do some work without fear of either infecting or getting infected.
Sure.
During COVID.
You mentioned your daughter earlier on, and I believe she followed her daddy into the legal profession. Tell us about that.
Yeah, she graduated, well, she broke my heart and went to LSU and was in the Golden Band from Tigerland. But I have had wonderful experiences going to Alabama LSU ball games in Baton Rouge. It's just been great. And she even hurt me more when she married a boy from Notre Dame graduate. And he was at LSU doing his graduate work. And then when she finished college, she decided, well, I think I'm going to law school. So, she was able to get into, Cumberland Law School, where my good friend John Carroll, who had actually been my federal jurisdiction professor when I was in law school, and then became my colleague when he became magistrate judge in Montgomery. He was a great friend of mine, so I felt comfortable sending her to Cumberland, and she graduated, got married, moved to Jackson, Mississippi, and became a clerk in one of the Court of Appeals judges there in Jackson, and clerked with him for 4 or 5 years, and then she became the clerk of the Court of Appeals. When she started having her 4 kids, it became a little dicey trying to manage home and her career. So she left the court, went home, got the kids up to a certain age, and they decided it was time for her to go back to work. Well, she decided law might not be her first choice, so she went to occupational therapy school, became an OT treating children ages 3 and below. And the school recognized her talent, and also that she already had 1 doctorate and was a lawyer, and one of their classes is law and ethics. And so they convinced her to become an assistant professor at the Mississippi College Medical Center, Ole Miss Medical Center in Jackson. And so that's what she does. She does her clinics in the morning with the children, and then she teaches in the afternoons. So that's what she's doing now.
Well, it sounds like she's led a very full life, 4 kids and 2 careers. That's saying a lot. You must be very proud of her.
We are.
And you held on to the family farm.
Yep, we've still got the farm. I don't know how much longer we'll have it, but
And you get up there to enjoy it.
I do. I enjoy it. I've got some fish ponds, and my neighbor runs his cattle, so I've got pasture for the cattle. And I've got timber farms on most of it. Part of it is bottomland, where we grow some pretty good whitetail deer and turkeys. So it's and the old house, my mom and dad renovated it in the mid-90s. So it's in great shape, even though it's really old. Underneath all the modernization, it's a really old structure. But yeah, it's a great place to get away.
So you've led a very full life, Judge. And you're getting on towards your 50th year of practice, and next year will be your 4 decades as a magistrate judge. Any thoughts looking back on the wild ride you've had?
It's been great. I've had some great cases. Some of the ones that I talk about mostly are prisoner cases. Some of those had really interesting twists and turns. Some of the admiralty cases that I've had have been extremely interesting. One was a trial with live video testimony from London and Scotland in a non-jury setting that went to the 11th Circuit, and everything seemed to be fine. They had no objections to the procedures that I used, but I wondered if the court was not going to say something about that, because I had not seen that before. But with the lawyer's consent, it went without a problem. The greatest prisoner comment that was ever made, prisoner got upset with my ruling. I'd ruled from the bench, and I told him what I was going to do. I was going to recommend to Judge Hand that he dismiss the case. And the prisoner looked at me, and I said, "Now don't worry, you can appeal my decision to Judge Hand." He looked right at me and he said, "Appealing your decision to Judge Hand is like jumping out of the frying pan into the
You didn't hold me in contempt for that, Judge, did you?
I had one from the Virgin Islands, in a criminal case, who'd been charged with smuggling marijuana. And, he kept calling me Your Majesty. And I didn't correct him at all. And so I've got a record. I had a trial, David Bagwell recommended a dismissal in a Satanist case where the Satan worshiper was trying to get the Satanic Bible introduced into the prison system. And the prison officials wouldn't allow it. And Judge Bagwell had recommended that Judge Cox dismissed it as idiosyncratic. Well, the 11th Circuit sent it back and said, no, you got to hold a hearing. So I'm the one that had to go, and I held that hearing. And he turned out to be a Hell's Angel from California that got caught in Alabama burglarizing a house or something. And he was trying to perform satanic worship rituals in the prison, which required bloodletting and all of that. And so he got into trouble. And I asked him, I said, you do believe in the Bible, don't you? And he said, yes, I do. And I said, well, what's your motive here? And he said, I just want to be in a chamber close to the devil. So, but that actually, I recommended to Judge Cox that he deny his petition. And that went up to the 11th Circuit too, but it was upheld. And this was right before Judge Cox went on the 11th Circuit.
Well, I'm sure, Judge, we could spend the rest of the day talking about all the varied cases you've handled down through the years. And I certainly would be up for some of that. But I think we'll just leave it there. I want to thank you for spending time with us this morning and giving us a picture of your career and your life, and very importantly, how the position of magistrate judge has grown so enormously over the 40 years you've been on the bench. So again, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Been a pleasure.